videos that I make on this channel are, as you have probably noticed, usually not very well scripted. Probably all sound like a bunch of ramblings. However, this video is going to be a little bit different because I actually have a full script. That is, it's the translation of an article that I posted recently on þessar.is, and I figured, you know, for my English viewers and whatnot, that I would just translate it and read it. So hopefully this video is not going to be too dry as a result. You know, I'm just going to add the appropriate imagery and stuff over. Anyway, term limits for presidents, no thank you. I had just reached legal voting age when the financial crash happened. Since I lived out on the countryside, I had to make do with watching the truckers' protests, the kitchenware protests, and the tear gas from the comfort of our living room. And when the election of 2009 came, I knew that this was an important moment for our country, and I could feel that the times that would follow would be quite equally historical. Barely had the left-wing government of Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir taken their seats when I heard that plans were underway to change and update the constitution itself. The plan was to make it more democratic and, or so young I thought, make it so that it would be harder for the powers that be to create another catastrophe like the one of 2008. This was all so exciting. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but I am actually very hungover. So yeah, I hope that doesn't affect the quality of the video in some way. However, this is where my memory starts to get a little hazy. I remember going and voting in the national referendum regarding the proposed constitutional changes. I think that I marked yes to everything, but I don't fully remember. And then I just forgot about all these proposals. And it seems like the entire people and those in charge also forgot all about it. For several years I don't remember anyone mention any proposed changes to the constitution. I was starting to think that I simply dreamt up the whole thing. But then one day Prime Minister Sigmundur Davíð was mentioned in some papers from Panama and resigned in disgrace. And an embarrassingly short time after that, Prime Minister Bjarni Benediktsson also had to resign. Shortly thereafter, the arch enemies Bjarni and Katrín started to work together, and then one day it happened. I heard Katrín talk about the crowdsourced proposed changes to the constitution and how she pledged to make them a reality by the end of her term as Prime Minister. At last. So this wasn't just a wild dream after all. Then one day I went to some meeting where Sigurður Ingi was talking about these proposed constitutional changes, and everything seemed to be in progress. But then he suddenly dropped this bombshell on me. One of the proposals called for imposing term limits on the President of the Republic. The preliminary proposal called for a total of 2 6-year terms. Unfortunately, this time I also wasn't dreaming. At some point during this long process that was the whole crowdfunding constitutional changes, some nanowits were able to sneak this nonsense into the draft proposals. Term limits for the president. What an absolute heresy. Hey, I just realized something. So, because this was an article that I wrote for, you know, the general public, you might actually be watching my first video that does not feature a single swear word. I know, absolute fucking tragedy, ain't it? Where was I? Honestly, I don't see the point of Iceland having term limits. Now, regardless of that, I'm fairly sure that our Guðni Thorlacius is not interested in staying in office longer than till 2028. I simply do not see him as the type of president that wants to have more than 12 years under his belt. However, there does exist the possibility that in 2028 several candidates will come forward to get themselves elected president, but that none of them live up to the standard bearer, that is the incumbent. What if a large portion of the people, say even an overwhelming majority of the people, would want President Guðni to continue, should he be willing? But this isn't just about Guðni. The same thing might happen when Guðni's successor has been in office after 12 years. Why should the constitution have built-in limits that may act against the will of Iceland's people? I have heard that the reason why some people want to have term limits is because that when the sitting president can run as often as he wants, he or she always ends up being re-elected. That is true. Thus far, no sitting president has ever lost an election. Ólafur Ragnar might have become the first to break away from this tradition in the election of 2016, but he pulled out of the race before the actual election. However, I find the fact that no sitting president has lost an election reveal that term limits would be more of a hindrance rather than progressive. After all, it has been proven thus far that a sizable majority of voters wants to keep whomever is in office there as long as he or she wants it. Since 1944, Iceland has had 6 presidents. That means that each president has been in office for an average of 12.6 years. One might say that an unofficial tradition has formed itself. That is, that each generation has its president. For example, I am of the Ólafur Ragnar generation, and my father is of the Ásgeir generation. People born after the start of the 21st century are thus of the Guðni generation. I find this to be a nice and beautiful arrangement, but that is just my personal opinion. It has often been pointed out also that this particular arrangement of having term limits with 2 6-year terms for presidents is a very common arrangement in many of Iceland's neighboring countries. However, the people who point this out in defense of having term limits for Icelandic presidents don't seem to realize or completely ignore that many of our neighboring countries also don't even have presidents. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, the United Kingdom, Belgium, I think, and the Netherlands. All these countries don't have a democratically elected president as head of state because they have royalty. And I don't see anyone in Iceland preaching that we should, elect a king instead of a president, or make Guðni our king just because that is a common arrangement in our neighboring countries. Also, to be fair, if anyone should be crowned king of Iceland, it should obviously be Ólafur Ragnar. I mean, his name even sounds like that of an ancient Norwegian king. Heill þér, Ólafur Ragnar fyrsti, konungur Íslands, verndari Færeyja og Grænlands. I don't think it is right that we should put some limits on our democracy, one that we're probably just gonna regret having later on. I bet you anything. If these laws are enacted, these changes to the constitution, there will be a time in history where the sitting president is gonna be the best option. I mean, just look at the last fucking election. What do you want? Do you want to choose between 2 Guðmundar Franklins, that we have to choose one, or do you want the sitting president? Whomever it might be, it's gonna be a better fucking choice than that idiot. So yeah, that's my take on it. Now, also, I want to add one thing. Now, obviously, a lot of other countries do have term limits, and I'm not saying that term limits overall are bad, but in other countries there's always, there exist countries out there where there's always a chance of not having term limits will allow an incumbent to simply become a despot, but I'm not worried about that here. So yeah, I think, so if you live in a country that has term limits, then fine, do you, boo? I mean, I don't know if you think that, I'm assuming that most people just accept it there, but as an Icelander, I would no. Term limits, not on my watch, thank you. Anyway, I hope you liked this video, I hope it wasn't too dry, and yeah, have a nice day.